On January 15th, 2009, on what seemed to be just an ordinary day of travel, US Airways Flight 1549 took off from LaGuardia Airport in New York and headed towards North Carolina. Now, this flight was done on a regular basis. Captain Chelsea Sullenberger, and better known as Sully, and his co-captain Jeffrey Skiles found themselves in a unique situation that day. One that required them to leave all their normal pilot protocols and routines that they would normally do on that flight. As they were flying, a group of Canadian geese collided with the plane. Not long after that, the one engine blew up and gave up. Soon after that, the second engine gave up. And in all the chaos and panic and anarchy that was going around, Captain Sully assessed the situation, and he decided that the best solution at that time was to land the plane on the Hudson River. It so happened that the plane landed safely and all 155 passengers were safe. It was a situation that required someone to be different, to think different, and just leave the norms for the time. As we look at the early church and we focus on lessons from the early church, today I want to focus our attention to 1 Peter chapter 1. And if you have a chance, I would like you to read the whole chapter of chapter 1. But today we're just going to reflect on a few verses of that. Peter finds himself in a unique situation, writing and encouraging the church that is scattered all over Asia Minor. Their situations were one of suffering and trials. And it's important to note that the suffering and trial that were talked about here was that Christians were living in hostile environments and one of paganism. They were facing things such as slander, riots, and also social ostracism. But in the midst of everything that was going around, Peter encouraged them to be different. And the first way that I want to talk about today, the way that Peter encouraged them to be different, was to change their thinking. In verse 13 it says, Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. Behavioral experts have discovered that human behavior is largely determined by our subconscious mind. This is best termed by the phrase that you may know as in garbage in and garbage out. And so much of our thinking is shaped by what's around us, which sometimes makes us think unwisely. But Peter challenges us to have self-control and set our minds on the grace of Christ. And that allows us to think about ourselves the way God thinks about us, to think about us the way that God sees us and loves us and cares about us. The second way that Peter challenges us to live differently, or challenges the church to live differently, is in verse 17, which says we got to live differently. In verse 17 it says, Since you call on the Father, who judges each person impartially, live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. Realizing and thinking different about ourselves will allow us to live differently. When we think God's thoughts about ourselves, we automatically live differently. We are encouraged to live in reverent fear. And this is not fear where we must be scared to go to God and ask God and lay our needs and ask God for things. But it's the fear of realizing the awness of God. It's the awness and the greatness of God. And even though we live in a world that at times is easier to give in and give up and just adapt to the norms, Peter encourages us and challenges us to live differently. Last but not least, we are challenged to love differently. In 1 Peter 1 verse 22 it says, Now that you have been purified by obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for each other, love one another deeply from the heart. Love sets us apart. Love is a display of God's work in our lives. Love is a litmus test for us as Christians. When we allow God to change us, we love differently. We don't love grudgingly. We don't love when we want to. We always love. So for you and I, even though we live in a world that is full of chaos and panic, just like how Captain Sullenberger felt at that situation, in chaos and panic, one way we can get caught up in the routines and norms of everyday life, we should always challenge ourselves to be different. So I just want to leave you with 3 questions and as a challenge for you for this week and as you go on. I want to challenge you to ask yourself these questions. How do I need to think differently? How do I need to think differently? Maybe it's about you, about thinking differently about yourself or thinking differently about others. How do you need to think differently? The second one, in what way do I need to live differently? Our lives is the expression of God, and everybody sees sees God through us. And how do we live our life? And we got to ask ourselves this question. How do I need to live differently? And the last one, who do I need to love differently? Love is so hard at times. It's easy to love people that are friendly to us, that have our backs, that have the best interest in our hearts. But at times we're challenged to love people who have different opinions and different mindsets on us. Who do you need to love differently? And so my challenge to you and to take hold, to have an awesome week, but be different. Be different. Ask yourselves this question. How do I need to think differently? In what way do I need to live differently? And who do I need to love differently? Take care. God bless you.